Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
I'm dreaming of a white
Thanksgiving.
Hey, there aren't any Thanksgiving songs, really.
No, because they would all be about how Columbus came and just wrecked house.
I mean, every other okay, maybe not every, but it's a major holiday, and usually somebody will have made a money grab at it. You'd think like some songwriter.
I bet if we YouTubed Thanksgiving song, you would hear some atrocious music.
I mean, there are some songs that sort of work, but there's no like iconic Thanksgiving song. Trust me, I've cut like advertisements that are going to play during Thanksgiving, and you always run into this problem as a marketer, which is like, it's not really Christmas music that works, but it's not really, what do you put there?
Yeah, you would do, I don't know, songs about pumpkins. There's the Great Pumpkin Waltz from the Charlie Brown Christmas
That's more
soundtrack.
Halloween, though.
Yeah, that's true. There was a song by, it was pretty much like Rebecca Black's Friday, but it was called It's Thanksgiving. It was 3 years ago. I'm looking at it on YouTube right now, and it has 16 million views, and it's just one of those, a girl and her family paid someone to produce a really crappy video and song for them, and it's called It's Thanksgiving.
The fact that I've never heard of that song just shows that there's not a good Thanksgiving song, but that is somebody trying to make a money grab. It just didn't work.
Yeah, apparently Adam Sandler has a Thanksgiving song too, so there's that.
I liked your solution. I'm dreaming of a white Thanksgiving.
I hope it's not snowing by Thanksgiving.
Just like the ones I used to know.
Hey, you have a good voice. Look at that. You, are there any fireplaces nearby? Because you should be singing in front of it. This is the most long-winded intro we've ever had to the show. Welcome, everybody. You're listening to The Command Zone. I'm your host, Jimmy Wong.
How's it? It's Josh Lee Kwai.
Yeah, and we are definitely thinking of a white Christmas, or dreaming in this case.
If you're not in the States, then, some places, Canada still has, I think, Thanksgiving, or some places still celebrate. I might be wrong about that, Canada. I'm sorry.
All the Canadians are like, it's okay, we forgive you.
All the Canadians are like, hey, that's not true, eh?
They're like, oh, sorry that we misconceived you.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
My sister lives in Canada, so
nice. That gives you free reign to, and we know Andy and Brendo.
Oh,
and Scott.
True. Our friends from the Space Janitors and Commander's Brew podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is a super long-winded intro. Today we are going to be further reviewing the Commander 2015 Precon decks.
Yeah, we had a really good response to the last video.
Yeah, a lot of people really liked it. Tons of comments, a lot of views or listens. These are among our more popular shows, as set reviews generally are. And this is a great time of year for Commander. This is the time of year where we're in the spotlight.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And also, it's a great time because you're gathering friends and family for Thanksgiving, so you can play Commander with them.
Because I'm dreaming of a white Thanksgiving. I'm not, actually, because there's no chance it happens in LA. There's never snow here.
No. Oh, my gosh. If snow happened here, all hell would break loose.
Well, it would mean that hell had frozen over, so it would also be breaking loose.
Yeah, I like thinking of Los Angeles as just a precursor to hell, because it sometimes is that way.
So anyway, the decks we're going to be reviewing are the black and green deck, which has Marin on the cover, and the green and blue deck, which has Azuri on the cover. So
yeah, which we voted as, I guess, most powerful commander out of the box, I think.
I think Azuri, just that card, is the most powerful of the new commanders. But that Precon deck, the way we reviewed last week, if you didn't listen, is that we're going to just sort of talk about those decks straight out of the box. What are some of the good cards? What are some of the bad cards?
Worst cards.
Yeah, what are some of the notable reprints? And then we're going to discuss how that deck might play if you just literally ripped it open and played it without changing anything.
Yeah, hopefully you sleeved it.
Hopefully you sleeved it. And then also what cards you may be able to add in quickly. We're not talking about massive overhauls of the deck. We're just talking about, like, if you just switched out 6, 7, 8 cards, how you could sort of make it quite a bit better by doing that. And obviously, if you just totally overhaul the deck, you'll be able to make it a lot better. But we'll talk about those type of things, maybe further down the line. This is basically for being able to go to the store, grab it, make quick changes, and make it better right away.
And the big thing is also, like, we know you've already bought a deck. We don't want you to have to spend hundreds of dollars upgrading it. This is a great way to just sort of start, see if you like the direction you're going, and from there you can sort of personalize it to your own tastes.
Yeah, and I actually got a chance this past weekend to play a lot of these decks
right.
and play the decks against each other. We had our good friend, the professor from Tolarian Community College, was in town visiting, and we played a ton of Magic. And the first thing, I picked Prof up at the airport. We drove straight to the local game store and picked up my pre-orders. I pre-ordered 3 of each of the Commander decks. Went back to my house. Some friends showed up. We sleeved them up and just had a couple of Commander games just straight out of the box.
That's awesome.
So it was good research for the show. It was a ton of fun. These decks play like they're a lot of fun. They're way, way more fun than last year's.
Yeah, monocolored is probably not the best straight out of the box, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, and I think the Planeswalkers also were, while cool, that dynamic made the games take longer.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, Planeswalkers are actually like life gain cards too. Because anytime you attack a Planeswalker, you're not attacking a player.
Yeah.
These decks do stuff. Games happen and they end. Yeah, had a ton of fun. So that's something I would definitely recommend for people, is just getting a couple friends, getting these decks, and before you change them, play them against each other, because they do play a lot of fun. And there's a lot of cards in there that you wouldn't normally use because, you know, they're just not on the power level of like our really ratcheted up, super tuned decks. But it creates a lot of fun. It's almost like playing limited versus playing constructed in standard, say.
Yeah, that's cool. I also like it because it's kind of like the dual decks where they were built to be played. Even though they may not be optimized, they were still, someone put all those cards on the list for a reason, and they have the right number of lands in there, so you should shuffle it up and give it a go.
Yeah, tons of fun. I would definitely recommend it. And speaking of Prof's visit, just as a quick tease, we did spend an entire day shooting some videos.
Filming in the wild.
In the wild.
And around the kitchen table.
And so look for some cool stuff coming up. We will not spoil anything further for now.
Nor will we put a date on it.
No, definitely we won't do that, because that makes us have to work at a certain speed, which we don't want to do. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, look forward to the next episode of the Command Zone, which actually, did we already say this won't be the week of after Thanksgiving?
Correct. So we usually record on Thursdays, but that will be Thanksgiving Day. So we're not going to have any new Command Zone episode the first week of December. It'll be the second week of December.
So,
and to warn you, there'll probably be a couple weeks taken off around Christmas too. So
probably. So look forward to an episode December 8th. And a lot of people have also been asking to get back to the deck techs, and we will definitely get back to that.
Yeah, a lot of questions about deck doctors. Yes, we are still accepting submissions, and we plan to go back into it. But for now, we got to talk about these precon decks. It's what's happening in the world of Commander. And we're going to start with the black and green deck.
So black and green, known in Magic for being the colors of sacrifice, of recursion from the graveyard, black being symbolic of death, green being symbolic of nature, and these are two colors that seem to be at opposites, but they actually get to make some really powerful cards. And the main Big Daddy, or Big Mama, I always get this wrong, Marin, or this is definitely a she. Oh my gosh, I'm flubbing.
I think they're both she's, but I'm not sure. But Marin's definitely a she.
Marin's definitely a she, yeah. Marin of Clan Nel Toth. One of the first images spoiled for Commander 2015, too. 2 black and a green, legendary creature, human shaman, a 3/4. Whenever another creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. We've talked about experience counters. These are outside of the game. They cannot be affected except for with proliferate, I believe.
You cannot remove them, and the only way you could sort of add them besides the card text is proliferate.
Yeah. And then Marin also says, at the beginning of your end step, choose target creature card in your graveyard. If that card's converted mana cost is less than or equal to the number of experience counters you have, return it to the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand.
The otherwise part is easy to overlook.
Yeah.
But it means that Marin can target a creature in the graveyard. Let's say you've got 2 experience counters and that creature costs 4 mana. You can at least draw that back into your hand, even if you don't have anything that's 2 CMC in there.
You're essentially drawing 2 cards every turn. One of them happens to be on your end step, but that is insane.
It's very powerful. Marin is very, very good. It's not hard to get your creatures to die, so it's not that hard to put experience counters onto yourself.
She seems very powerful.
Yeah, this is one of the decks I played over the weekend. It's a very good deck. It's very good out of the box. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. I guess I'll break down one of the other legendary creatures is Mazarek, Kraul Death Priest. It's 3, a black and a green, so 5 total. For a legendary creature, Insect Shaman. It's a 2/2 with flying. It says whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, you put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control.
And it is a he, according to the flavor text. We did it.
We did it.
We
so
got both the genders correct.
We got for now.
Yeah.
So Mazrik, also very, very powerful. You'll notice it says whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, so as you pointed out a couple shows ago, fetch lands will trigger this. Just sacrificing anything by any player, including yourself, that's not Mazrik, will trigger it and give all your creatures +1/+1 counters.
Yeah, which is pretty sweet.
This card synergizes really well with Meren because Meren wants your creatures to die, and so does Mazrik. So these two legendary creatures are in synergy, which we did see in some of the other decks. And there's one more legendary creature in this color combination.
I would just say, by the way, Mazrik makes me want to make a 5-color Marchesa deck because Mazrik and Meren together are both like best friends with Marchesa.
You know, one of the people currently on this show has a 5-color Marchesa deck and is very excited to put Mazrik in there.
Well, I cannot wait. And by that, I mean I literally do not want to wait. I don't want that to happen. The last card is a reprint, and it's one of... It is a very powerful card. It's Gerard Golgari Lich Lord. Black, green, zombie elf for a 2/2 zombie elf. Gerard Golgari Lich Lord gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. So again, this is synergizing with every other commander in the box. 1 the black and the green. Sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. And you can also sacrifice a swamp and a forest to return Gerard from your graveyard to your hand. So you probably wouldn't want to do that if you're running this as your commander. But this card is amazing with both Mazrik and Meren.
Yeah, what we're seeing is that all three of the legendary creatures really synergize well with each other. And in the other decks, we've seen some synergy, but not like this. Like think of the Daxos deck. It has Teysa. Those two things don't really go together exactly. And then it had Uncle Carl, who's a life gain. So those three legendary creatures don't work that well together. Think of Mizzix. Mizzix had Arjun, who doesn't really do exactly what Mizzix wants to do. Now, it had Talrand and Melek, who do. So this one, all three are working in conjunction. They're all doing what the other ones want to have them as sort of like their sidekicks or the backup plans. And so this is really, so far, very focused.
Speaks to probably how distinct and understandable the color combination is too. Black and green, I think, has always been about tokens and sacrificing things and messing around with the graveyard and rebirthing them. So
I mean, even like the black-green archetype in Battle for Zendikar Draft is a token sacrifice theme. So it's definitely common to this color pairing. Okay, so we're going to jump into the statistics like we did for the other decks. We always start with ramp and card draw. So this deck has about 7 ramp cards.
Pretty good.
Yep, and about 7 card draw cards.
Better than most.
And we're seeing around 6 to 7, besides Mizzix, who had about 14 card draw cards, is what they're going with, it feels like, for most of these decks. So, again, we usually like 10 or so. So it's close. It's in the ballpark. Something we're seeing across the board on all of these precons is a very low number of board wipes.
Yeah, which is interesting. But it makes sense. I think they only really printed one serious board wipe, and it was in black. But it's not in this deck, which I feel like it should have been. But who knows why?
Yeah, and this deck really doesn't have any board wipes. Nothing that we would call a true board wipe, which is very, very low. You know, I've said in the past I like to have at least 4, often more. So 0, obviously not sufficient.
However, it does have spider spawning, which is like the opposite of a board wipe.
It's
shout out to BDM.
Yeah. And then single target removal is the next category. And there's about 7 single target removal spells. Plus there's a few like players sacrifice 2 creatures, or all players sacrifice an enchantment, or your opponent sacrifice a creature. So those are similar to single target removal, but not the exact same, because in those cases, your opponents can sometimes choose, blah, blah, blah. But there's things like that. And then, so those are sort of the categories we always talk about with every deck. And now we'll get into some specific stuff. So there's a category I called stuff that wants to die or be brought back.
Yeah.
And there's about 20 cards, mostly creatures, that want to go to the graveyard or else come back out of the graveyard.
There are only 37 creatures in this deck, by the way, so that is actually pretty good. That's over half of the creatures in this deck like dying and coming back. So we're talking about enter the battlefield abilities, Wall of Blossoms, when it comes to the battlefield, you draw a card, or when it dies abilities like Sacred Tribe Elder, which you can sack to find basic lands.
Right, and that's a ramp card that you can recur and then keep ramping, and then when you're done ramping, you can switch over and draw cards.
Which is cool. That means Sacred Tribe Elder is actually like 1 and a quarter ramp cards because it requires Marin to come out, and if it does, then you get additional value out of it, which is kind of cool.
Correct. Then sacrifice outlets, very important to the deck, because if your stuff wants to die, you have to have a reliable way to put it into the graveyard. And, if people know what you're doing, a lot of times you can't just attack in. They just won't block. Secure Tri-Roller does 1 damage. They'll just ignore it.
Yeah.
So, well, it can sack itself, so that's not a good example. But you know what I'm saying. There's about 10 sacrifice outlets. Gerard is one, which is a good amount. And sacrifice outlets, we've talked about many times in the past, are just very good in Commander because people do things like cast Insurrection.
Yeah.
And if you're going to die to the Insurrection creatures, a lot of times it's just like, well, I'll just sack all my stuff. And now you don't get anything from me. Or they go to steal your commander while I sack it. Sometimes a sacrifice outlet that just doesn't even do anything is good. And all these sack outlets give an effect.
Yeah, it's great too. Stuff like Ultra's Reap. It's just awesome when someone points a removal spell at something. We're like, well, it's going to die anyway. I'll sack it and draw some cards additionally. And then that spell fizzles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The next category I called ways to place things into the graveyard. So this is not the same as a sack outlet. This would be like taking cards from the top of your deck. There's like Lotleth Troll, which allows you to discard cards to some effect. So that is actually a way to like put a specific card into your graveyard, because there might be times when you're like, Marin has 8 counters, but I've only got 6 mana. If I want to play this 8-drop, I need to get into the graveyard from my hand somehow. And there are cards that allow you to do that. There's about 5 cards that are ways to place things into the graveyard.
That's pretty cool. Which is interesting too, because usually like when you play cards like Anger, the big question is, how do I have to play it and then hope someone kills it?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
That's why you usually want something like Survival of the Fittest that allows you to go trade Anger, put it in the graveyard, and go find another creature. And so there are ways to do that kind of thing, although Survival of the Fittest is not in the deck.
No, it is not.
That would be awesome if it was, but it's not. And then one last category I called payoffs for creatures dying or being dead. So these are things like we would talk about, like Dictate of Erebos, which we'll talk about later, but it says things like whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent has to sacrifice a creature. So that's a payoff for your creatures dying. Something like Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat in the new set would be a similar type effect. So there's about 7 cards that are payoffs for your creatures dying or being dead.
Yeah, like Bone Horde, which is just an equipment that gives you a creature +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards, but you'll probably be the one feeling that the most.
Gerard, again, cares about how many creature cards are in your graveyard. Yeah, those are payoff cards for things dying. So that's, again, those cards don't care how those cards got into the graveyard either, so if you're able to just put them directly, like mill yourself, that's a good way to...
Draw to 8, discard on purpose.
Yeah.
Good old days. The good old days, yeah.
So, I guess, what does this tell us? All these stats. So we look at these stats, and what does it tell us? And it tells us the obvious thing, I think. There's a lot of creatures that want to die and be brought back. There's a bunch of sacrifice outlets which will work with Mazarek's ability. But, I mean, ultimately, I think Marin is clearly the way to go with this deck.
I think Marin is also the most powerful out of all of them, just because the experience counter recursion is great. And it's also repeated. It happens over and over again. And, I mean, it really is kind of nutty that you get to draw a card into your hand if your experience counters isn't big enough.
Yeah, even the worst case scenario is not bad. It's just an extra card in your hand.
Yeah, and also, like, if you have cards that are, you're like, well, I could either bring this to the battlefield because I have so many experience counters, or I want to put this other creature into my hand, you can just choose the more expensive creature. You don't have to always put something onto the battlefield. Especially if someone's like being like, I'm going to Wrath at any moment. You're like, well, I'm just going to put this into my hand in that case.
Yeah, just to have it for later.
There's plenty of reasons.
So Marin's pretty grindy. It's a card advantage engine when you get down to it. The one thing I'll say about this deck is it's very focused. There's not a lot of cards that are sort of outside of what the deck's trying to do.
Yeah.
With Daxos, like we said, there was some life gain stuff. There were 6 or 7 of those that just didn't fit in. Mizzix had this weird Arjun and some strange cards like Lone Revenant, and they had there's not very much of that in this deck, which is interesting. And I think if I had to choose, I would say that Marin's probably the most powerful deck just straight out of the box.
Yeah.
Mizzix maybe gives us a run for its money. This is based on what I saw playing all the decks against each other.
I think Marin is also a little easier to play than Mizzix is, because Mizzix you have to think about sequencing a lot more and also what order to do stuff in. Well, that is what sequencing is. But yeah, I think Marin just is like, look, this is Value Town. You're going to get stuff back and you're going to keep playing it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. That's a really good statement. I do think Marin is not easy to play,
Right.
Because you'll have a lot of decisions to make as far as which creature you bring back, which ones you sacrifice so that you can bring them back. But Mizzix is definitely more complex to play. All right, let's talk about the best cards.
All of them.
The best cards in the deck.
Well, Eternal Witness is just the greatest. 1 green, 2/1 human shaman. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. It's a regrowth.
Yep.
Which is great. You want this pretty much every deck that can play green. You want this. Not to mention you're gonna be getting this back over and over and over again. This is definitely one of the cards that would be like, look, I need this sorcery back. It's not a creature, so Marin can't bring it back. Ewit, here you go.
That's exactly the point with Eternal Witness, is that Marin already brings back all your creatures.
Yeah.
As soon as you get Eternal Witness onto the table with Marin, now any card you put into your graveyard, you can get back. And so it makes the whole deck recurable at that point.
Seems pretty good.
Yeah, to me, Eternal Witness is probably one of the most important cards that you always want to get out in every game, because all of a sudden now the world is your oyster. Any card that's either in your hand or in your graveyard, you have access to at all times. The next one in the best cards category is Butcher of Malakir. They
reprints. Yeah, I like this guy.
They reprint this card like every 5 seconds. It's 5 and 2 black.
Wait, hold on. They just reprinted it.
Wait, hold on. They just reprinted it.
Awesome.
Wait, hold on. Nope, but they're about to reprint it.
There it is. They did it.
5 and 2 black, 7 mana for a 5/4 flying vampire warrior. Whenever Butcher of Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature.
Hey.
So it's Grave Pact, it's Dictate of Erebos on a stick. They didn't reprint Grave Pact or Dictate in this set, so this is the closest we've got, and it's still pretty dang good.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's still a 5/4 flyer, and you're probably not going to always be paying 7 mana for it, because you'll be able to get it out with Marin.
And that's the great thing, is both Dictate and Grave Pact, which we'll talk about later, they're harder to recur with Marin, whereas the Butcher of Malakir is pretty easy to recur with Marin.
Yeah, and that actually is a great reason to include it in the deck, not to mention they had to reprint it because they have a quota that they have to fulfill at Wizards, apparently. It's
that
like,
and Iona.
It needs to go set, commander set, dual deck, commander set, dual deck, commander set.
Conspiracy.
There's going to probably be another dual deck just called Butcher of Malakir, where it's just the Butcher.
It's Butcher versus Butcher.
Yeah. Oh, God. It's like who can get it out first and force the other guy to just sack a bunch of things. Finally, we have Skull Clamp. Hooray. Of course, this is probably the most important equipment in the entire set. It's one of your best forms of card draw in green and black. It's a 1-drop artifact equipment that's banned in everything except our format. It costs 1 to equip. A creature gets +1, -1. And whenever a crypt creature dies, draw 2 cards. So I remember reading originally that Wizards was like, originally it used to be like, equipped creature gets +1/+1. They're like, that's too powerful. Let's make it +1, -1 without thinking.
That'll tone it down.
That'll tone it down, yeah, because anything with 1 toughness, you essentially draw 2 cards for a creature dying and equipping Skull Clamp onto them. So there are many times in games when I have tokens out where I just go clamp, 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 and you're just tapping.
3 mana, draw 6 cards.
Yeah, pretty good.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Skull Clamp often the best card in any deck that it's in, because the decks that are running it can use it.
Yeah. Even if the creature doesn't die when you equip it, you just sacrifice it at instant speed and draw 2 cards, you know.
That's the thing about this deck, is that you have 10 sack outlets. It's a big theme in the deck. So very often you put Skull Clamp on, and then that doesn't kill it, but you still sack it and draw the cards. Super good card.
Yeah.
Also,
we should say that Mazarek is also one of the best cards in the deck, as is
Gerard,
yeah.
Mazarek, is amazing. I mean, I thought for a long time about suggesting to run Mazarek as the sort of lead singer, but Marin is straight out of the box quite a bit better, I think.
And has a better voice. Mazarek sounds like a freaking... Dreaming of a white green black Christmas.
A lot of people things dying.
She would technically want to be dreaming for a Gruel Christmas because it's green red, right?
Gruel.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess she, in the spirit of green black, she should be dreaming of a green black Christmas.
Of a Golgari Christmas. Golgari Thanksgiving.
Mazarek, I don't even think Mazarek can sing. Look at him.
He sings like this.
That was killer. I shouldn't have done that. Let's talk about some of the worst cards. And Josh, you wrote here that this section was harder than normal.
Yeah, this there's not a ton of really bad cards in the deck. There are some, and there are a lot of cards that are sort of suboptimal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, there's a clearly better card that does the same thing, but there's not a lot of cards where you're like, what is that card even doing? There's not Lone Revenant style cards. There's cards that are like, it's not perfect, like, but it still does what that slot in the deck should do.
Yeah, which is interesting. It's almost like we're being sponsored by by this deck in particular.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the Butcher Malakir is making us talk about it. He's like, please, I need people to realize.
Get reprinted again because I don't ever get reprinted in 17 sets.
So Vulture Zombie is a great example of this. It's just 3 black and a green for a 3/3 flying plant zombie. It's a plant zombie. Weird. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Vulture's Zombie. So this thing could get huge, but it's also just easily targetable. The flying is nice, but yeah.
It's fine. Again, this is not a horrible card.
Yeah.
It's just slow, and that's just not the way the deck's going to probably win.
You know it's
which
a better
is like
card?
slowly making one creature big.
Yeah. Algigariel, baby.
Now, Algigariel
the truth
is hard to target because it has Shroud.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing.
Even though it's more specific, Algigariel is a 3 and a green 1/1 Shroud Crocodile, and whenever another creature dies, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it. So sure, whatever, it's not flying, and it's not whenever any permanent's put into the graveyard, but it has Shroud.
Yeah, and a Vulture Zombie is whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard, so it doesn't count your own.
Yeah.
It's just, again, it's fine. It's just not that great. The next one is Centaur Vine Crasher. This is a weird card. 3 and a green for a 1/1 plant Centaur.
All these plants. Maybe we just have that for plants.
Has trample. It says Centaur Vine Crasher enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. With a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of lands in all graveyards. And then it says, whenever a land is put into a graveyard from anywhere, you may pay green. If you do, return the Vine Crasher from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, so this is like the card that you're hoping everyone has fetch lands and playing Evolving Wilds. I
mean,
guess.
how many lands can you expect to have in people's graveyards in general?
Not that many.
Unless somebody's playing Titania,
yeah,
or your playgroup is known for having people play like Armageddon or Wildfires or those type of effects. In general, like you look around, maybe there's 5 or 6 lands. That's being pretty generous.
Yeah. Not to mention the ability to put it back into your hand is all right, but it'd be way sweeter if it was the battlefield, right? That would totally make this much more playable than it currently is. It's 3 and a green for a 1/1 that may become like a 4/4 trample. It's like, meh.
The deck has no way to put a bunch of lands into the graveyard except for self-mill, and there's not a ton of it already in the deck. There's a little bit.
Yeah.
If you added dredge and a bunch of self-mill, then maybe this gets a little bit better. But if you're doing that, then you can find better cards than this card.
Yeah, you definitely can. Like the truth. Next up, Banshee of the Dread Choir. This is in the Myriad cycle. So whenever this creature attacks for each opponent other than the player that's defending it, you can put a token that's a copy of that creature onto the battlefield and attacking a player or a planeswalker they control, and then you exile those tokens at the end of combat. So Banshee of the Dread Choir, 3 black for a 4/4 spirit, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they discard the card. Just sounds like a great way for no one to like you.
And it doesn't do anything that you want to be doing. It doesn't have an enter the battlefield effect, so it doesn't actually synergize with Marin that well.
It's not like it's making you discard the card, right?
Yeah, and the discard, it has some synergy with like Bone Hoarder or Night Howler, these cards that care about how many cards or creature cards are in all graveyards and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But that's a really slow way to go about doing that. And I just don't think this card has enough synergy with the deck to really be...
Vulture Zombie cares about this.
Vulture Zombie doesn't say dies?
No, it put into a graveyard from anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's another reason to take this out, because I'm saying take out the Vulture Zombie, so we don't keep... This is just... It to me, it just doesn't feel like it synergizes very well. It's not that it does nothing, and it's not that it's a horrible card.
Yeah.
It's just that it's not very focused towards what you want to be doing.
It's also a 4/4 that's just going to draw a lot of aggression. Like, these cards have a home somewhere, but it's very hard to negotiate these politically, because when you play it, everyone's going to look at you and be like, are you ever going to swing with that? Because if you do, you're just going to really face down a lot of anger or just retribution at the table because of it. So it's a tough one to navigate.
For sure. All right, let's talk about some notable reprints. This deck actually has some pretty good ones.
Yeah.
The first one is, well, I know you played in a lot of decks.
Yeah, Eldrazi Monument. It's a 5-drop artifact. It's kind of like the Big Daddy. This and Akroma's Memorial are sort of the two Big Daddy artifacts that help out your tokens. This says creatures you control get +1/+1 and have flying and indestructible, which is really crazy for a 5-drop.
Really good.
But however, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature if you can't sacrifice Eldrazi Monument. So this card sucks if someone is able to board wipe in a way that gets rid of your indestructible creatures, because when it comes back around to your upkeep, you immediately sacrifice the monument. But
well, it also sucks in some decks because you don't want to be sacrificing your creatures.
Right.
Fortunately, in Marin, you want to be sacrificing your creatures because you can get them back, and also it gives you experience counters.
Yeah, which is pretty sweet.
So this is just a really good card in this deck, and it was getting pretty spendy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good value.
Thank goodness.
Another notable
I'm gonna
reprint.
get more now.
Yeah, exactly. Another notable reprint we mentioned earlier, Eternal Witness. High Market actually in this deck, and this card was going up in price. High Market's a land. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it to sacrifice a creature and you gain 1 life.
Yeah, instant speed sack outlet that's on a land, so it's going to tap you for mana anyway. You don't need to pay mana to get this onto the battlefield. It's in a 2-color deck, so you're not worried about crazy mana costs. Great card.
This card should go in most EDH decks.
Yep.
Again, it protects you from, because without the tuck now, so the tuck rule changed, we don't have to worry about commanders being shuffled into our decks. So the one way that they can still really get us is to steal our commander with a control magic or a mind control type effect. Like, I'm not talking steal it for a turn. I mean steal it for good.
Forever.
And if you don't have a way at that moment to counter that spell or kill your own commander, then it could turn your whole deck off.
Yeah, you're in the bad spot.
So High Market's a way to be ready to just counter that control magic, because they go to control magic, you're thinking, you go, okay, sacrifice it, and puts it back in the command zone. So Homeward Path and High Market are 2 cards that go in a lot of commander decks, and that's probably one of the reasons why it was a little spendier. It's not like it was super $20 or something, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it only been printed in Mercadian Masks and a From the Vault before now.
Yeah, but it was usable in like all the commander decks, so there was a lot of
Exactly.
demand for it. So I'm glad they reprinted it.
Not to mention, by the way, if you look at the arts, the new version is considerably brighter and poppier, sort of like the colors-wise, than the old versions.
Oh yeah, it's faded in the old version.
Yeah, it's because it's just old art, and so they like went in and put some Photoshop filters on it. And they do this for a lot of reprints, actually.
Yeah, just make it a little more contrasty and a little bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's cool.
that's very cool.
All right, so let's talk about how this deck plays like right out of the box. We alluded to it earlier. It's
You
pretty
played
grindy.
it the most, for sure. So
Yeah,
you
it's
know.
pretty grindy. The great thing about it is very, very focused. There's a lot of synergies. A lot of the cards, they work in concert. So that's the reason I think that it's very powerful right out of the box. If you're looking, if you want to have a little edge and your friends are going to go to the LGS and you're each going to grab one of the precons and play it, I think Marin is probably the way to go, or Mizzix, one of those two.
Nice. I would agree with that. Yeah, it's interesting because there are a lot of cards that you might want to put in here because you're like, oh man, I can't wait for Marin to recur this. But keep in mind that it is at the end of your turn, so cards like Craterhoof Behemoth, while they are good, you're going to be putting it into your hand as opposed to putting it onto the battlefield. That's
a really good point. You want a lot of enter the battlefield effects because it'll come in at your end step. It can't attack, but that enter the battlefield effect will still go off. The other thing I would say is think about the style of deck that you generally like to play, because this is going to be a slower, grindier style. It's not exactly control, but it's more control-y. It's an attrition deck. It's going to grind your opponents down until you just have more value than they do.
Well, the cards we are going to recommend to add definitely make this a lot more control-y.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah, let's go to the cards to add section.
So you guys may have already guessed this. Dictate of Erebos / Grave Pact. Dictate of Erebos is definitely the more affordable version of both, and in a lot of ways actually slightly better because it's less restrictive in its mana cost. It's 3 black instead of 1 black. It costs 1 more, but it also has flash, and it's basically whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. It's so good. You can get people with this, right? If you have scions or spawns that you can sack at instant speed, someone plays out their general and does a bunch of stuff. Avacyn hits the board. Oh no, what are you going to do? Flash and Dictate of Erebos, sack some guys. Everyone goes, oh crap, didn't see that coming.
It's so good. It can really hose Voltron decks. This is just one of those cards where if you land it on the table and nobody answers it in a deck like this, you can keep all other creatures off the board.
Yeah.
So very good. Grave Pack's, again, the more expensive version. Either one's good. The fact that you could possibly get both means there's a lot of redundancy with Butcher of Malakir.
Yeah.
You can really more reliably get this effect onto the table, which the deck really likes. The next one are Ashnods / Phyrexian Altar. So these are artifacts that let you sacrifice creatures for mana. Ashnods lets you sacrifice a creature and add 2 colorless, and Phyrexian, you sacrifice a creature and you add 1 mana of any color. So these are ways you want to sack creatures anyway because of Marin, and it's a way to turn that into mana, which is so powerful because it lets you cast another creature, and then Marin brings the creature you sacrifice back. So it actually becomes, a resource of mana.
Yeah.
It sort of snowballs on itself.
Phyrexian Altar is, I think, the more powerful of the two because you can add any mana of any color. However,
I think in a 2-color deck, Ashnods might be better.
Yeah, because you can just play bigger spells because it's 2 colorless for 1 creature. That's just straight up twice as good as sacrificing an Eldrazi Spawn or Scion. And you can really pump out some huge stuff. Sometimes you'll just find that having one of these altars out opens up your hand entirely. Like, you look at your hand and you realize, oh wow, I can actually cast every single card in here if I want to.
Yeah, it can lead to the wins, because you just snowball into this thing where you've got so much stuff on the table so early.
Yeah.
The next one is another. It's funny because we said Dictate / Grave Pact, and then we said Ashnod / Phyrexian, and this is another / category, and it shows you that if you build this deck, there's a lot of redundancy for the effects that you want, which is a great thing when you're building a deck. So the next one is Havoc Demon. It's 5 and 2 black for a 5/5 flying demon. It says when Havoc Demon is put into a graveyard from play, all creatures get -5/-5 until end of turn.
Hey, that's pretty sweet.
So a recurable board wipe.
Essentially, it's one better than Languish, kind of.
Yep.
It does kill your own creatures, but you shouldn't care that much about it. And if you're doing this, you should be able to plan around it adequately enough as well for it to really help you out.
For sure. And just getting it into the graveyard once means that you always have the threat of bringing it out when you need to. It's very powerful, especially against token decks and things like infinite Kiki-Jikis and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, that might happen at any moment. And if I have this on the table, I can sack it not in response. I can sack it after they're done making an arbitrary amount of, Pestermites and save myself.
Yep. Pretty good. Kagamaru, First to Suffer, also sort of does the same thing. 3 black for a star. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your hand, and then you can sack them for 1 black, and all creatures get -X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So again, just another. You can sack it on the creature itself, which is really great. It's its own combo, I suppose. Not to mention, you're going to be drawing a lot of cards with this deck because of Marin.
And you don't have to play all your cards a lot of times because you can just get stuff out of the graveyard. So you're playing a creature for that turn if you want to, for Kagemaru to, get bigger. And this, I'm going to pause here really quick and talk about the philosophy of this deck had no board wipes. And it'd be very easy and not necessarily wrong to go in and add all the normal, the usual suspects of Toxic Deluge and Damnation and In Garrick's Wake and all this stuff. But a deck like this wants that stuff to be on creatures if you can.
Yeah.
Because Marin doesn't bring back Toxic Deluge. Now, with Eternal Witness, you could get it done, but it's way better to, instead of requiring an additional card in play to sort of recur that stuff, to put that stuff on a creature because Marin can interact with that.
Yeah.
So now those board wipes become reusable. And whereas in the Mizzix deck, we wanted less creatures and more instants and sorceries. So anytime we needed an effect, we would look first for that effect on an instant and sorcery. And in Marin, if we want an effect, we're like, oh, we don't have card draw. We want that on a creature. Well, we don't have ramp. We want that on a creature. Oh, we don't have board wipes. We want that on a creature.
Yep, and you got a lot of creatures that do it. These next 2 ads are probably the most important. I would say it's the first thing you should put in the deck.
I agree. These cards are ridiculous with all 3 of the legendary creatures.
Yeah.
It's Awakening Zone and From Beyond. So Awakening Zone is 2 and a green. It's an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi Spawn creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. From Beyond is the same thing, but it makes a 1/1 Scion that has the same ability.
I didn't realize this till now. It's actually not optional for From Beyond.
Oh, From Beyond's not a
no
main
matter
ability.
what, yeah.
From Beyond, you can also sacrifice to go find
an Eldrazi.
Yep.
Which is interesting because you have to be careful here because a lot of the Eldrazi shuffle themselves and your graveyard into your library.
Oh, that's a really good point. I would not put Kozilek or Ulamog or something into this deck because I don't want my graveyard shuffled into my library.
Certainly not.
These cards are so powerful because you can sack either the Scions or the Spawns on demand to get experience counters on Marin.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, they give you mana when you do that. Also, if you have Mazarek out, then all of a sudden you sack one of those creatures, give all your creatures +1/+1 counters, and then if Mazarek's out, you want to make little creatures every turn and eventually pump
Swing in.
Yeah, and go wide. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. These cards are supremely powerful in this deck, and they would be the first two I would add.
Yep. I would add multiple copies if I could, but I can't. A couple other cards, actually. Catacomb Sifter and Viscera Seer. These are both cards that allow you to... Catacomb Sifter puts a creature on the battlefield that you can sack to Scion, and then whenever a creature you control dies, you get to scry one. And Viscera Seer just lets you sack a creature to scry one. So it's doing everything you need to do, and also just helps you make sure you, after a certain point, never draw land anymore.
Yeah, it's close to drawing cards when creatures you control die.
Yeah.
Two more cards. So this is another slash. That.
All these slashes.
More redundancy. Fleshbag Marauder and Merciless Executioner. These are basically the functional reprints. So it's a creature that comes into play, and when it does, each player sacrifices a creature. That includes you, but you can sacrifice the Fleshbag Marauder or the Merciless Executioner.
Yeah, I remember the first time that happened to me. I was like, wait, what? Oh man, you get to just sack your Fleshbag?
Yeah, and if you have Butcher of Malakir out or Dictate of Erebos, now all of a sudden they got to sack two creatures to your one.
Ooh-wee.
And then with Marin, you can just bring the Fleshbag Marauder back out, sack it again. So you can do these things where, like, you make everybody sack 6 creatures every turn.
Yeah, it's a great way to lock down the board in creature-heavy decks.
Yeah, it really, like, besides, like, an outright token deck that's only trying to make tokens, it can make it so no other deck can keep a creature on the table.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I've even seen it keep up with token decks before where they're like, I play 10 1/1s, and you're like, okay, sack 2 more, sack 4 more, and they're like, crap, I only have 2 guys left.
Next up, one of my favorite cards ever, Solemn Simulacrum. Simulacra, I'm dreaming of... Okay.
This was my number 1 artifact in Commander.
Yep.
We may have to revisit the top 10 artifacts because I feel like I would change mine now.
Yeah, to put Chromatic Lantern at 1.
You caught me.
All right, cool. Solemn is the again a perfect Commander card. It's because notably it's been printed 3 times in Commander products. It's a 4-drop that's a 2/2 artifact creature golem. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. And when it dies, you can draw a card.
So it's ramp, it's card draw,
and it's really good in this deck.
It's recurable.
Oh my gosh, you get an enter and the exit the battlefield ability. Count me in.
I mean, if you just recur this with Marin a couple times, it's insane value. Drawing cards, ramping, it's crazy good.
Yep.
This is in one of the Precon decks. In fact, it might be in the Azuri deck. I'm not sure which one it's in, but it did get reprinted. So,
yep.
So you can.
It is in Azuri.
Yeah. So, and the last one we'll talk about. Again, these are not all the cards. These are just sort of our top picks for an easy ways to improve the deck. Is Birthing Pod.
Oh,
this card is
probably birthed, bro.
It's probably sad because it doesn't get talked about that much these days because it got banned in Modern.
It's amazing in EDH though if your deck can support the birthing of the pods.
It's an artifact. It costs 3 and a Phyrexian green. So Phyrexian green means you can pay either green mana or 2 life. It says pay 1 and a Phyrexian green. Tap the Birthing Pod. Sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost. And you put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. You can only activate this ability anytime you could cast a sorcery. That sounds complicated. If you sacrifice a creature that CMC is 2 mana, then you can go get one in your deck with that costs 3 mana and put it directly into play.
Mm-hmm. And then you can start the cycle over again if you have other 3-drops you want to put into play because you get to Marin it back.
This is really, really good in this deck. It's a lot like Survival of the Fittest or something like that. It sacrifices what you want to do. It gives you experience counters when you do that. Plus, you don't lose anything when that creature dies because you go put another creature onto the battlefield. Yeah. And then Marin brings back the original This is very, very good.
Yeah, not to mention because it's Phyrexian mana, you can pay it with life. You can essentially, if you have 4 mana, you can Birthing Pod and use its ability the turn it comes out. You pay 4 life, but that's still pretty good.
Still great.
Yeah. So
This card, also, because it was banned, the price has come down significantly.
yay.
So it's
Hooray.
obtainable for more people. This is one of the early cards I would definitely, after Awakening Zone and From Beyond, this might be the next card I would add. Nope, Solemn. Dictate. Then this.
Then that?
I don't know. Maybe that before Dictate.
No, Dictate's too good.
Dictate's really good.
It's Flash. You have 1,000 of
But
them.
Birthing Pod is a tutor. So any card you need to go get. Like
1,000 Dictates.
What do you mean?
Don't you have a bunch of them? Didn't you?
Oh, true. I don't have as many as Jason Alt. I maybe have.
You guys are both the 2 people that have spec'd hard on it.
No, he's literally got like a couple thousand. I've got like 50.
Oh. That's more of any one card they have except for maybe lands. So
I have like 120 Supreme Verdicts.
that card is great though.
But it hasn't gone up in value, so that probably didn't work.
It's a slow grind.
It's a slow grind.
Like this deck. So I like this deck a lot. I think I'm going to build myself a Marin deck.
I like it. Our friend Alex Kessler from the Masters of Modern podcast just built one. I don't know the list, but I saw a picture of the deck.
Yeah.
So not all the cards, just
he completed, by the way, all 10 of the enemy colored pairs.
Oh, all 10
of the pairs, enemy and allied. Yeah. So good job, Alex.
Good on you, Alex.
Try hard. Just kidding.
I think I'm going to build a Mazrik deck.
Nazarick, yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Oh, it's called Marchesa, right?
No, I'm going to put that in Marchesa, and then I'm going to build another deck that's just Mazrik.
You should do Mazarick Infect.
Mazinfect. No, I'm going to do Azuri Infect, sorry.
You're doing Infect?
I'm thinking about it.
Yeah,
I have my grafted exoskeletons and a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah,
so.
Speaking of Azuri, that is the next deck we are going to review. The blue and green deck, of course. Segway. I'm imagining riding a Segway towards the blue and green deck.
Like one of those Paul Blart. Oh, that's not a Segway, is it?
I think it's like a souped-up Segway he uses.
Super Segway? Is
Super
that Mega,
Segway.
like Megamorph?
It's
Super Segway?
Yeah, it comes in with a +1/+1 Paul Blart. It's blue and green, I think, is our favorite color combo.
It's
in
definitely
EDH.
mine, yeah.
It again, as we said before, it does everything you want it to do, ramp and draw you cards. And it's got Azuri Claw Progress, which is nutty as the front of the deck commander. And the other 2 are Kaseto and Prime Speaker Zagana. Azuri we've talked about already. 2, a green and a blue, a 3/3 elf warrior. Whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you get an experience counter. Whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, oh my gosh, tokens, hey.
Yep.
At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is the number of experience counters you have. So he mega pumps a dude, and then also puts lots of little dudes and dudettes on the battlefield and gets you experience counters.
Well, he doesn't put dudes out.
Right,
but
he doesn't
wants
put dudes.
dudes
He
to be
wants
put
dudes
out.
in, yeah.
Yeah, so there's small creature and +1/+1 counter synergy. The next legendary creature is Kaseto Orachi Archmage. Archmage? I always ask that question. I never get the answer.
You will this week.
It's 1, a green and a blue for a snake wizard, a 2/2. Kaseto has an activated ability, pay a green and a blue. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. If that creature is a snake, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn.
Prof loves this guy.
Yes. Yep. Important thing to note, you can give unblockable to anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only gets the +2/+2 if it's a snake. But if it's not a snake, it's still unblockable.
Wait, Kaseto might be a woman.
Kaseto...
Who knows? One or the other.
Kaseto, guy or girl, is a snake.
Yeah.
So Kaseto always works with him or herself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of good in that worst case scenario, you just pump all the mana into your general and then swing for commander damage.
Yeah, or put grafted exoskeleton on it and win.
So it's a Voltron-y, unblockable, snake tribal type thing going on with Kaseto.
Yeah, and then we have a Merfolk Wizard and Prime Speaker Zagana as the last legendary creature in this deck. 2 green, blue for a 1/1. She comes into the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control. And when she enters the battlefield, draw cards equal to its power. So if you have a 6/6 out, she comes out as a 7/7, and you draw 7 cards when you cast her.
It's pretty crazy. Prime Speaker decks are very powerful because reliable card draw whenever you happen to need it is just a very powerful thing in EDH, especially when you've got green. So you can just put a ton of ramp in there. And the problem with putting a lot of ramp into a deck is that you end up like with a lot of mana available but nothing to do with it. But Prime Speaker Zagana lets you draw a bunch of cards and then spend that mana. So it's a really good card. It's a very powerful deck by itself. But what it wants is big creatures, because that's what Prime Speaker Zagana like feeds off of. A big creature you have in play, and then you draw a lot of cards. It's in direct contention with Uzuri, who wants small creatures, because that's how you get 1/1 counter, or that's how you get experience counters.
Yeah.
However,
if Uzuri pumps something huge and then you play a Prime Speaker, then you draw a lot of cards.
Right, exactly. It's just requiring an extra step, I think.
Yep.
Anyway, this deck was really hard to break down statistics-wise, because it's hard to figure out what the deck wants to be doing. It's not like the other decks. Daxos, Mizzix, Marin, they all had pretty focused builds. There was a few extra side things that were maybe off on a little bit of a tangent, but this one is all over the place a little bit. I'll read the stats here.
Yeah, especially because there aren't that many token generators in here.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not clear what you want to do. And you'll see by the different categories that when I did the stats that I was like searching for the thing that was going to be like the flashing sign that said, do this, do this, do this. And I never really found it.
Yeah, it's funny because you have a whole category called snakes. So.
Yeah, because I was like, well, maybe it's a snakes. Okay, so here's the stats. First, we'll start with ramp and card draw like we always do. There are about 10 ramp cards. So there's a lot of ramp. This is the most we've seen of any of the precons so far, which makes sense because it does have green. Card draw, there's about 7, which is a good amount.
Not for these colors, though.
Well, yeah, it does have blue. Now, the thing I noted here is there are 4 creatures and Biden of Thassa that draw you cards if you do combat damage. I did not count those under card draw because they're conditional, but so that number could be higher, and it could really be 12.
Yeah.
There's about 2 board wipes. Now, that's normally low, but we've seen these precons don't have a lot of board wipes. None of the decks have like 4 or 5. So 2 is actually on that scale.
Yeah.
Okay. Single target removal. There's about 6, which again is right in the wheelhouse of what we've seen. Maybe slightly. No, I'd say it's about average for the precons. Okay. Now we get a little crazy. Creatures with power 2 or less. This is just because, if you'll remember, Uzuri gives you an experience counter whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield. So there's 29.
Out of 33.
Including a couple of token creators. So if a card made tokens, then I counted it in this category. So some of those aren't necessarily creatures, but there's 29 cards that put creatures with power 2 or less onto the battlefield, so that can give you experience counters. Cards that care about +1/+1 counters. As we talked about a couple of episodes ago, some of the crazy things you can do with Uzuri involve cards like Sage of Hours that remove +1/+1 counters and give you extra turns, or there's something like Gyre Sage, which taps and adds mana.
Hero Sage.
Yeah. Taps and adds mana equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it. There's all kinds of creatures like that.
Yeah.
So I was looking for that. There's only 4 creatures in this deck that care about +1/+1 counters, or 4 cards. Okay, cards that have or give trample, because if I'm making
big guys.
Yeah, if I'm using Uzuri and I'm putting like 10 +1/+1 counters on a creature, then I want it to give trample or flying or something. There's only 3 cards that have or give trample. Not very many. So that was a dead end. Okay, how about snakes? So let's look at Cassetto, who wants to pump up your snakes and make them unblockable. There's about 7 snakes.
Hey, not bad.
Not that many. Okay, how about cards that like want to become unblockable?
Thanks to Cassetto's ability.
Because again, Cassetto, makes something unblockable. There's about 8. I included the Biden of Thassa. There's a Scythe Claw, which we'll talk. I don't know if we will talk about later. It basically is like quite a spike. It does damage, or they lose half their life.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you do combat damage to a player,
a little bit.
Yeah, whenever you do combat damage to a player, if the Scythe Claw is equipped, then they lose half their life. Rounded up? I think it's rounded up.
Yeah.
So there's about 8 cards that want to be unblockable, but that's not a ton. I just look for token creators because, again, Uzuri, there's about 6. And then I look for mass pump spells because, well, if you're making a lot of tokens and going wide,
that's what you want to do.
And there's about 4. So
it's funny.
It's confusing.
It's confusing because there are 29 creatures that trigger Uzuri. However, in every other category we just listed here, it goes anywhere from 3 to 7. So it's not like it's ever focused in one area, especially not like the other deck that we talked about today, because there are, stuff that wants to die, 20 cards.
Right.
10 sack outlets. In this deck, everything's under 10.
And most of it's like 3s and 4s.
Yeah, which is, so it's tough. It definitely is Split.
Yeah, there's a lot of creatures that give Azuri experience counters, but there's not a lot of ways to do anything interesting with those counters.
Yeah, and that's sort of where the spikiness of I think the deck comes in, is getting turns with Sage of Hours and just going infinite turns.
Yeah. Or at least giving a guy trample, but there's not even a lot of that. You know, there are a lot of large creatures, so Prime Speaker Zagana feels like, she's out. And that sort of leaves us with Cassetto. And the more I think about it, the more I think Cassetto's probably the right choice to lead the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Because Cassetto can pump himself or herself.
Yeah.
So worst case scenario, dumping a bunch of mana into your commander to make them unblockable and huge is not a bad plan.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah. And Cassetto synergizes. You've got 10 ramp spells. Ramp is good because Cassetto is a mana sink. Because every extra mana you have that you can't use, you can just dump into Cassetto. Synergizes really well with all those creatures that want to do combat damage and draw you cards, and the Biden of Thassa.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I ended up. I don't know that it's 100%. Like, I think this deck you can sort of play either Azuri or Cassetto.
Yeah. Well, we saw the prof play Cassetto when we played against it, and it actually was sweet. He was like, all right, I'm going to hit you for 10 commander. And it's like, oh, that's halfway there. And then you equip Scytheclaw to it, and it's like, oh, even if he doesn't kill you with commander damage, for that reason, someone immediately lost that game because he just Scytheclawed them once and hit them once with his commander, and it was like, oh, sorry, Wes, you're at like 13 life, dude, you're gonna lose.
Yeah, the deck can just all of a sudden be like, boom,
yeah,
you're at 8 life, like out of nowhere because of the unblockability. So I do think the prof was correct in choosing Cassetto as the lead singer, as it were.
Oh. Snakes.
I think Cassetto is actually a lot better than he or she looks.
Yeah, I think Cassetto's great, actually.
Yeah.
The fact that it gives +2/+2 to itself makes it a really good Voltron commander, because a lot of times, like, just the threat of attacking with it and someone be like, well, I could block, or I'm going to lose my creature, or like if I could block or if I don't block, then I might take lethal. Like,
well, it gives unblockable,
sweet.
So if you pump anything into it, it's just not blockable.
Yeah.
It's not like Intimidate or something. It's just like, nope, I'm going to take that damage unless I have instant speed removal.
Yeah.
Which you don't have unlimited instant speed removal. And Cassetto's pretty cheap, so even if you kill Cassetto like 2 or 3 times, still coming back out in that 4th time.
Yeah.
Now they've got more mana. So it's actually, I was surprised. I thought Cassetto was kind of junk, when we originally reviewed the decks. And then seeing Cassetto in action, I was like, oh, no, that card's scary.
Yep, I like Cassetto a bunch. So let's talk about some of the best cards, which are, some of them are actually new cards. And this first one's ridiculous.
This first one is very good.
Azuri's Predation. 5 green. So we're talking great Aurora status here. It's a sorcery. For each creature your opponents control, put a 4/4 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. Each of those beasts fights a different one of those creatures. So this is the semi-board wipe of the deck.
Mm-hmm. And it is very, very good.
Yeah.
We've seen it get cast, and there's like 9 creatures on the battlefield, and so you get 9 4/4s, and those 9 4/4s eat all except for 1 or 2 of the other creatures.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what happens is you cast this, and you end up with killing all except for 2 other creatures on the board and leaving you with 7 4/4s or something like that.
That's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Especially if you have a haste granter, then it's like, all right, time to go to combat. Now, notably, you can't have 2 creatures attack the same guy or girl, because that you'd be able to stack it up and kill something huge. That would really push it over the edge. But other than that, like, Azuri's Predation is really cool. I like this card a lot.
The swing on this card is huge. You can go from, like, you're, like, massively behind to you're massively ahead, like, very quickly.
Yeah, totally.
This is a card I think is going to end up going in a lot of green decks. Again, green doesn't have a lot of board wipes. Mm-hmm. This is a great, like, in-flavor board wipe for green. It makes tokens. They fight stuff. That's what green does. It makes tokens, and it has the fight cards. The next one is another awesome card, and I think this card's going to end up in a lot of commander decks, is Command Beacon. Mm-hmm. It's a land. You tap it for 1 colorless, or you tap it and sacrifice it to put your commander into your hand from your command zone.
Yeah, this is kind of like the one card where people are like, why didn't they print this in every deck? And as a result, it's slowly climbing up price because it is a very good card. Yeah,
any deck that relies on its commander, especially commanders that are kind of expensive, think of like Maelstrom Wanderer or Melik, or those decks where, like, oh man, if my commander dies twice, I can't cast them maybe ever again in the game.
And that's a real feel-bad moment because you want to catch a commander, and it just gets really annoying after a while. And sometimes when someone's like, okay, I'm going to Cyclonic Rift, you're like, oh, thank goodness. Like, they didn't just kill my commander because I can actually play it for the regular mana cost.
Yeah, this got way better with the tuck rule because you can't kind of get hosed by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very good.
I'm all in.
I'm all in.
Bident of Thassa. This card is a reprint from Theros block. The Bident is good just because it synergizes really well with Cassetto, and it's also just a good card to have on the battlefield. People usually don't. They kind of overlook the power level of this card. It's whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card. And I think more important ability, 1 in the blue, you can tap it. Creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able.
It's really interesting what this does to the game because you can make it so somebody can't just like sit there and block. You can force them in, force them to be open to everybody else attacking them.
Yeah, not to mention if you have a good just sort of defensive stuff up, or if you have like a propaganda,
yeah, all of a sudden they can't attack you.
They can't attack you, and them forcing all their creatures to attack is such a dangerous proposition because they have to point it at someone, and then they leave themselves completely open.
Yep, and turning all your guys into like Shadow Mage Infiltrators is pretty good, especially since Cassetto gives them blockable.
Yeah,
that draw card thing is pretty strong.
Not to mention you can stack it on like your Elvish Visionary and swing at someone for 1 and be like, hey, look, I'm just drawing a card.
Yep, for sure. Scythe Claw, we already talked about, is 5 mana for an equipment. It costs 3 to equip. It has Living Weapon, so it gets a germ counter. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half his or her life rounded down.
Hey.
This is brutal because Cassetto makes things unblockable, so, she's just like, hey, deal 20.
Yep.
Actually, 21.
20. Just get all
with
the
the
way
germ.
in there. Yep. I like Scythe Claw. I like all those effects because it really speeds up a game. Losing half your life is no joking matter. Even though you have 40 life, it's still very significant. In fact, you actually lose more life than you would if you had started with 20. Instead of losing 10, you lose 20.
Yeah, that's a good point.
16 or whatever. Arachnogenesis. This is it, man. This is the best.
This card is going in every green deck. This is insane.
I literally bought 16 of these.
It's awesome.
Arachnogenesis is insane. It's the best. It feels to me like one of the best fogs ever.
It might, besides Constant Mists,
because you can recast it.
Because you can recast it. It might be better than Constant Mists though. It's at least equal.
Yeah.
It's severely undercosted.
Yeah, it's severe, especially for what it is. 2 in a green, instant. Put X 1/2 green spiders creatures tokens with reach onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures attacking you. Prevent all combat damage that will be dealt this turn by non-spider creatures. Even if you just put 2 onto the battlefield, it's a fog, and then you get 2 1/2s for
2
3 mana.
2 1/2s with reach is a 2/4 with reach. That's a giant spider that costs 3 in a green.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
That costs less. That's even without the fog.
Yeah.
Fog is totally playable in EDH anyway. We've talked about it many times because so often somebody does something where they create 100 tokens on this turn and attack with it all in the same turn. And it's like, well, if I could just have made it to my turn, I'd cast my board wipe or do something, but I don't have that time because I don't have an instant speed board wipe or whatever. Yeah. Or another player has a board wipe, but they can't, they don't have mana untapped or blah, blah, blah. And this just gives you that extra layer of time so you can deal with the Kiki Jiki player or whatever.
God, this is so insane.
I love this card.
This card is so ridiculous.
It's so good.
I'm going to get destroyed by it. I'm going to have a bunch of spiders swing back at me because I went nuts with my token deck.
Well, that's the other thing. If they attack...
They have reach. They block the flyers, too. You can just stack all these 1/2s on their giant flyer and eat it. Nom, 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 nom.
Well, also those times if you're in a play group where somebody does the crazy thing where they Kiki Jiki or Splinter Twin, a Pestermite, and attack you with 1,000 Pestermites, you cast Arachnogenesis, their Pestermites do 0 damage.
Yeah.
You get 1,000 1/2 spiders
that all
and
do
then
damage.
You crack back on them, and they're all tapped out because they attacked you.
Yeah.
This card, I love this card.
Yeah. Unless you're playing Spider Tribal, then it's not as effective.
if they're
playing Spider Tribal, yeah.
It's true. You still block each one.
Someone send us a Spider Tribal list. I'm sure it's out there.
The last card under best cards, and this is only one of the best cards if you're playing the Cassetto strategy here, but Chameleon Colossus is 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 shapeshifter. It has Changeling, so this card is every creature type at all times, means it's a snake, has protection from black. It says pay 2 and 2 green, Chameleon Colossus gets +X until end of turn, where X is its power. Now, it doesn't tap it or anything, so if you have 8 mana, you can do this twice. So it's a 4/4. Cassetto, activate. Make it unblockable. It's now a 6/6 because it's also a snake. Pay 4 mana. It's a 12/12. If you have 4 more, that's a 24/24. It just can kill them so fast.
Yeah, gets out of control really fast.
Yeah. So this is a card that looks innocuous. You'll play it. It's a 4 mana 4/4. Whatever. Make it unblockable, pump it a couple of times, kill you.
Yeah, I dig it. I can dig it. Thank you, Chameleon Colossus, because I've never had a reason to play you until now.
This is not the type of card that I'm normally advocating. Like, just in the very last deck, the Vulturous, what was that called? The Vulturous Zombie is like make a big flyer, but that's make a big flyer slowly over the course of 2 or 3 turns.
Yeah,
and
that's
also
just asking to get removed.
And also, it's a flyer. People are going to have flyers sometimes. Doesn't have trample, whatever. This is in a deck that's made to make things unblockable. So a card like this is so much more powerful.
Yep. I am a fan of that card. All right, let's talk about some of the worst cards. Experiment 1. This is the first and last experiment I'll be doing with this guy. It's just green for a 1/1 with Evolve. So whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature under your control, play a +1/+1 counter on Experiment 1, and you can remove 2 +1/+1 counters from it to regenerate Experiment 1.
It's just not.
Yeah.
It's just too slow.
Not to mention, if you're like trying to play the Azuri token route, you put a bunch of 2/2s into play or 1/1s. They just Experiment 1's like I leveled up once.
Yeah. I'm already too big for you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, Azuri, I guess the plan is put like a bunch of counters on him with Azuri.
Yeah, make him huge.
But he doesn't have trample or anything. It just takes too long. It's just not impactful enough.
Yeah, it's funny how trample really does make a big difference there.
Yeah. If you had a lot of cards that gave trample, but again, then any creature's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this card, it just doesn't do much.
Yeah.
The next one is Caller of the Claw. It's 2 and a green for a 2/2 elf with flash. When Caller of the Claw enters the battlefield, put a 2/2 green bear creature token onto the battlefield for each non-token creature put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn. Now, this card might be okay in Azuri if you're running Azuri, because it puts a bunch of tokes out.
Gotta get them all them tokes.
Maybe. You have to have mana open when they cast their board wipe or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those cards that reads really well, and then when you try and play it, you understand, like, oh,
yeah,
they cast Wrath of God, but I tapped out that turn. Or they cast it, but I didn't tap out, but I only had 2 guys in play, so I only got 2 2/2s, so who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also like, how did Azuri live? You know what I mean? Because Azuri has to be out for you to get the experience counters from the tokens.
Mm-hmm.
So if they wrath your board and you're playing this, then how's Azuri out?
Yeah, you know what I'd rather play? Arachnogenesis.
I'd rather play that than almost any card.
Yeah.
Yeah, Arachnogenesis totally works with Azuri because you just don't block with Azuri. He's still alive, and then you play Arachnogenesis, put 10 spiders into, and get 10 experience points.
Yeah.
Counters.
See, that's why I want to make a 5-color deck with these guys, because Azuri and Marin, it's really easy to get experience counters, and then Mizzix is just like drooling at the thought because the experience counters are interchangeable, and they count for all of your commander creatures that care about them.
You want to read the next one?
Yeah, so next up we got Noble Quarry. Noble Quarry is 2 and a green enchantment creature unicorn. There's only one. It's this one. It's a 1/1 with bestow 5 and a green, so you can cast it as an enchantment or a spell. And all creatures able to block Noble Quarry or enchanted creature do so, and enchanted creature gets +1/+1. So
it's a lure.
It's a lure. It's interesting because, yeah, you do want this in the deck. This is like a form of trample in a way. It allows you to get damage through, but it costs a lot to bestow it. It only gives +1/+1, so it's gonna die pretty much as soon as it attacks something.
Well, the good thing is the Noble Quarry will then jump off, and you can do it again next turn.
But that's if you pay its bestow cost. Otherwise, guess what it is? It's a one-trick pony.
It's also just not good if you're not running Azuri. In Cassetto, it's not good because you're going to make things unblockable. And given that we're saying I think Cassetto should be the front man for the deck, then, or front woman or lead singer or whatever you want to say, then this card needs to come out.
Mm-hmm.
If you decide to run Azuri, then maybe it stays.
Yeah.
I think if you decide to run Azuri, though, the amount of change that you need to make to the deck is big.
Agreed.
The last one is Elvish Visionary. So it's 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf shaman. When Elvish Visionary enters the battlefield, draw a card.
Hey.
This is a card that you want in decks like Marin, where you're going to sack it and bring it back and use it as a card draw engine.
Yeah, over and over and over again.
Yeah, this deck doesn't really have a lot of ways to bring Elvish Visionary back. It has.
I mean, Elvish Visionary by itself is never a bad card.
Right.
It's 1 in the green draw card for a 1/1. You can block something with it. But if you're not really looking to abuse it and do things with it, it's not like you're trying to make Cassetto pump this up, right? It doesn't even get pumped up. It's an elf. It's like you want to make a 1/1 unblockable with Cassetto. Do you want to have a Zeri stack a bunch of counters on your Elvish Visionary?
Not really.
No. It'd be sweet to do it to a Solemn Simulacrum because someone wants to block it and kill it.
At least then if they do, then you get something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this card just doesn't do enough to me.
Yep.
Okay, let's talk about some notable reprints.
We've already talked about 3 of these, but in different forms. High Market, again, a great sack outlet, great mana producer. It's just one of the best lands in the game. E-Witness, we all know what she does. Solemn Simulacrum, we all know what that does.
Take Solemn out of this deck, put it into the Marin deck. Actually, it's still good in this deck. It's good in any deck. But
Yeah, put it in any deck.
Yeah.
And Mystic Snake, we haven't talked about this. This card's great. It's one of Marshall's favorite cards. He puts it in this Animar deck, even though it is very overcosted for what he's trying to do with it. It's 1 green, blue as a 2/2 creature snake with flash. When it enters the battlefield, counter target spell, and it's a snake.
it's pretty cool because it synergizes with Cassetto.
Yeah.
And it counters a spell. And, there's a couple ways, I think, in the deck to bounce it back to your hand.
Yeah.
So, at the very least, you can high mark it and then Eternal Witness it.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. Broke
let's talk about the deck. It is unfocused.
This deck
Even
has...
just talking about the cards, it's like these are all cards that are cool in different ways, but they all want to do things with the different commanders.
Yeah, I think the deck will play very inconsistent. So sometimes it'll get off to a good start. You'll find Scytheclaw, a couple of snakes. Cassetto will make them unblockable.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be able to, get some people out of the game, KO them pretty fast, maybe run away with the win. But then sometimes you won't draw any of those pieces, and you'll draw all the stuff that's supposed to go with Azuri, and the deck won't do much.
Yeah.
So, or if you run Azuri as the commander, the same thing will happen. Sometimes you'll get a bunch of snakes out, and it's just not going to work, cohesively.
Yeah, it's not going to do what
all
you
the
want
time.
it to do.
Yeah. So this is the deck that requires, I think, the most work out of the box to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right,
Makes
let's talk about
sense.
some cards to add in. Just like the deck, there are a lot of different ways to go. I think we'll probably do some Azuri deck tech type stuff later down the line.
I hope so.
Yeah. So we're going to talk mostly about what we would add if you're running Cassetto.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, it's obvious, is Edric, Spymaster of Trest.
He's sort of the other commander you would want to run in green-blue if you want to do just sort of the overwhelm and get damage in / draw cards.
The
green.
unblockable.
Yeah, the unblockable aspect. This guy's the Spymaster himself. He's great.
Edric, Spymaster of Trest, 1 a green and a blue, so 3 total for a 2/2 elf rogue. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. This counts you. It's also interesting because when Edric's out, nobody wants to attack you because they don't draw cards if they attack you. They want to attack each other. It's a very, very good card, very strong deck in its own right.
Yeah, it also just forces other people to do stuff to everyone else. And as long as Edric's out, people usually won't point their aggression at you because this is helping the decks that like it, and the decks that don't like it are trying to get rid of either the creatures attacking them or Edric. But the thing is, no one's swinging at you. So it's kind of like a Howling Moon kind of ability where it's like everyone
Howling Mine.
benefits. Howling Mine.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I was thinking about Blood Moon. It's always in my head.
Boo.
Yeah, because it's great. It is a very political card that doesn't have to do any politics. It just does it by being on the board.
And you're giving unblockable to your guys. You can always draw cards if you want to. Also, Cassetto can give unblockable to your opponent's creatures. So you can do
good point.
things like, hey, I'll make this guy unblockable so you can draw a card if you attack this guy.
Yeah.
So you can make those kind of political moves.
Or even just like, hey, this Planeswalker's out. He has creatures to block it. But look, here, how about this? I'll make your guy unblockable so you can swing at them.
Yep.
It's like, I'm doing you a favor / myself. Sashiro the Anointed, 4 green, legendary creature, Snake Monk. Obviously, Snake Tribal is a possibility with this deck. Other snake creatures you control get +2/+2. Hey! Whenever a snake you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card.
So it's like the Edric of snakes.
Mm-hmm. This guy's like totally the homeboy to Cesaro, whatever, Snake Boy. Because if you're going to do a Voltron deck with Cassetto, then Sashiro's like, he's there. He's like his hype man.
He's the hype man. I was going
Yeah.
to say Robin. But
Robin.
okay.
Oh yeah, he is the Robin too.
He's the
There you go.
Robin. Holy drawing cards, Cassetto.
You did it.
That's the old Robin from when I was a kid, not the Robin from these days. Which is Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I saw him the other day, by the way.
Oh really?
Yeah, he was walking into one of the buildings at Disney.
Nice.
Probably to like walk across a tight wire across two buildings. I hear he does that.
He is the man on wire.
So yeah, obviously you can do Snake Tribal. We're not going to mention all the Snake Tribal cards. There are a lot. So you can totally go full on Snake Tribal. I know that's what Prof's doing. He's very excited to do it.
I'm excited for Prof to do it.
I'm
Someone
excited.
needs to.
I'm excited to see him do it. A card I would add to literally every deck with blue in it is Cyclonic Rift.
Yep.
So if a deck has blue and it doesn't have Cyclonic Rift, then this is going to be on the list of need to add. Cyclonic Rift is 1 in a blue. For an instant, it says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, but it has overload for 6 in a blue. If you pay that 6 in a blue, you may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change the text by replacing all instances of target with each. So then it would read, so for 7 mana, it would read return target non-land permanent you don't,
Each target non-land
return
permanent.
each target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. It basically, your opponents only have lands in play. Everything else goes back to their hand.
I mean, basically, look, you're getting rid of all non-land permanents for the full turn. It sets everyone
But not
back.
yours.
Not yours. People are going to have to discard cards because they can't play everything. Like, this sends their mana rocks, their enchantments. It opens up the game for people to just kind of go nuts.
It's insanity. It's bannably good.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not saying ban it. I'm just saying it's of the power level of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another way you could go, if you're a mean person.
No, a smart person.
If you're Craig Blanchett.
In fact. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense because, look, you're making unblockable stuff. If you're going to go with Cassetto, if you're doing Azuri, then you're just making giant things, and you're going to find ways to get that damage through by playing something like Thassa.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Grafted Exoskeleton is one of the best equipments in terms of doing this. 4-drop equipment, equipped for 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Infect. If you guys don't know, if you deal damage to someone with a creature with Infect, it deals the damage in the form of -1/-1 counters to creatures and to players in the form of poison counters. Poison counters and experience counters, very similar. They live outside of the game, essentially, and they are unaffected by anything except for Proliferate, which means you can add more of those counters. If someone has 10 poison counters, they lose the game. They are poisoned to death. And Grafted Exoskeleton is essentially what it looks like. It's what Azuri's wearing in his art. And it's +2/+2, gives it Infect. However, when it becomes unattached from a permanent, you have to sacrifice it.
So you can't just hop it around
to
a different creature. If you put this on Cassetto and attack, he's a 4/4, and all you need is 6 mana to kill somebody.
Yep.
Because 6 mana gives him +6. +6/+6
and unblockable.
So you could literally, with Grafted Exoskeleton, just off somebody on turn 6.
Yeah. Earlier if you have some rocks.
That's mean and crazy and awesome.
Yeah, Grafted Exoskeleton's sweet. It's also one of the must get rid of equipments when it hits the board, which is kind of funny.
It's one of the most scary things that can happen.
Yeah.
The other one, we're not going to list all the Infect cards. If you were going Infect, you want a lot of Infects, not a little. Blight Mamba is 1 in a green for a 1/1 snake with Infect. It also has pay 1 in a green, regenerate Blight Mamba. So it's just a snake that has Infect. There's a couple other snakes that add poison counters, but adding a poison counter is not the same as Infect, because there's some snakes that say when you deal combat damage, put a poison counter onto that opponent, but that doesn't scale if you give them more power. Whereas the Blight Mamba, if you pump it with Cassetto, all of a sudden deals 10 poison counters all at once.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Very good.
Yeah, the fact that there are a few poison snakes, I think, out there, and they get really good with Cassetto. Finally, if you have some more dollar bills hanging around the bank, Sword of Feast and Famine, my favorite sword. It's a 3-drop. You equip it for 2. It gets +2/+2 pro, black and green. So Feast and Famine. Feast is green, Famine's black. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card, and you untap all lands you control. Insanity.
And with Cassetto, so good because you can just, without even thinking about it, dump all your mana into Cassetto, pump them, because you know you're going to untap your lands when you hit because you're making him unblockable. Or her. Sorry, don't know the gender still.
Who knows? Cassetto's got 4 arms, though, so we'll call him or her 4-armed. genderless snake thing.
We could probably have Googled whether Cassetto is male or female.
Is Cassetto a male?
But it's way more fun to
female?
just get a bunch of comments that are telling us, hey, don't you know Cassetto's male? You probably can.
It says, including results, is cast a male or female? And it's just talking to me about Ghostbusters. Dang it. So close.
Let's read the flavor text on
Yet
Cassetto.
so far.
Maybe that will tell us. Our revered ancestor, Shishiro, gave us wisdom greater than poison and fangs.
That's not true. You want to play with poison. And it's, by the way, a quote from Cassetto, so we have no idea.
That doesn't tell me if Cassetto's male or female.
Yeah, pretty much.
There's people yelling right now at their car stereo. It's a female, you idiots!
Look at, you can clearly tell by the headdress.
I'm just not up on snake fashion. So I don't really know.
And we haven't read the lore for Cassetto yet.
All right, so that's going to end our reviews of the Precon decks for today. We're going to do, when we come back in early December, we will do the Kalemne. You notice we've saved Boros for last, and we get yelled at all the time, speaking of getting yelled at, for bagging on Boros. So we're going to give Kalemne her own show.
You guys obviously sent in a ton of ideas for Kalemne, so you guys will help out us making that episode really interesting, because there are a lot of cool builds out there for the deck and ways to make it work.
And if in the meantime you haven't sent anything into us, now's your chance. Now's your chance. Between Thanksgiving and the following Thursday, we're going to be collecting all the cool ideas to make a show. So if you've got cool ideas, send them in.
And shouting out the coolest.
All right.
But you guys are all the coolest.
Time for the end step, where we talk about something cool. Speaking of cool, outside the world of magic.
Thanksgiving's around the corner.
What are your plans for Thanksgiving, Jimmy?
I'm going up to San Francisco. I will be hanging out at Anime Imports, which is the local gaming store there. Hopefully get to see Prof while I'm up there, and also playing some Smash Brothers and Magic with my good friend Brian.
That sounds fun. I wish I was going up there. Also, the Prof owes me the best oysters in the world or something, which he says is up there, and I still haven't had them. You should. You can do the recon.
I will happily do that recon.
That's a really tough. It's just a tough assignment. But somebody's got to do it.
You know what, boss? I got this. I'm on the case.
I'll take one for the team.
Yeah. Eating oysters. Yum, 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 yum.
I'll be down in San Diego with some family down there, so that should be fun.
Nice and warm.
Nice and warm. Well, yeah, that's actually true. I was thinking it's been cold lately, but not for like this. It's been like LA cold, not like cold for most of the country.
Let's not talk about it. That's why we're truly in a snowless land.
That's why we're truly jerks.
It was like 85 degrees today. What is it, November 19th when we record this? Get out of
town. Everybody out there, wherever you are, if you celebrate Thanksgiving or if you don't, I hope you have a good celebration with your family. Or if it's just a normal day for you and there's no Thanksgiving going on, I still hope you have a grand feast of some kind.
Yeah, call your relatives or family or loved ones. It's a good time to always reconnect. Even though you may not celebrate the holiday, you should at least be getting in contact with them and saying, hey, you're great.
You should get in contact with them, and then you should say, do 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 do. I'm dreaming of a white Thanksgiving. All right, don't forget to listen to our sister podcast, The Masters of Modern. Alex and Ben talk about modern as a format and all things competitive Magic. You can find them on rocketjump.com/TheMMCast. You can follow them on Twitter @TheMMCast.
Our editor is Terry Robertson, and special thanks to Geoffrey Palmer for the Living Cards animations. You can find Geoffrey online at Living Cards MTG on Twitter, and make sure you guys check out the videos. We release videos every single week for these episodes. Terry puts a lot of work into them, and they are super fun to watch because they show you all the cards we talk about without you having to look them up.
That thing that we're not talking about anymore that we're doing with Prof, with the professor, will someday be on our YouTube channel, so you should probably go subscribe now so that you know the moment that thing comes out, because it is going to be awesome.
Yeah, do it. Do it now.
Do it now.
And don't look back.
Get down now.
Yeah, you can find it at youtube.com/The Command Zone Podcast.
Subscribe now. Hit for the chopper.
All right, everybody. Head for the subscribe button.
Hit for the... It doesn't... All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you next time.
Peace.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.